Hello everybody, my name is TheZodiacLord, and welcome back to the second part of this thing about criticism double-parter type thing that I'm doing now. First things first, if you don't really like rambly, unscripted videos, then this may not be the video for you, so you're free to click away. Don't tell me I didn't warn you. Still here? Cool, let's go. So real quick, if you didn't already see it, I did a kind of part one-ish type video, a first video before, where I addressed my thoughts and opinions and things on people who give criticism, and I mentioned in that I wanted to make a video about the people who receive criticism, because I felt I had so many individual opinions on both sides of that topic that fitting them into one video was kind of impossible. You don't have to see that video to understand this one. It's not like this is really anything carried over from that video necessarily, but if you want to watch it, I will be sure to link it at the end of this video so you can watch that after you watch this one, or you can go find it right now or whatever if you don't want to listen to this. So yeah. Some quick notes to address before I really dive into the meat of this whole thingamabob that I'm talking about or whatever. First things first, this isn't a video addressing anyone in specific. This is just my general thoughts about things. It's not aimed at anyone. It's just general statements from myself, general thoughts and opinions and yada yada yada. Secondly, unlike the previous video, the previous part to this, the thing about like giving criticism, this one about receiving criticism, I'm gonna have less to talk about because I think what I generally have to say is things that people heard before, you know, and this is more going to be focused on actually giving tips on how to take criticism, how to handle criticism specifically. So with that being said, let's just jump right into this, shall we? So let's just state the obvious here. Criticism is good. Criticism, critique, other people's insight is extremely valuable to you, whether it be in art, whether it be in writing, character creating, whether it be in just anything generally, even in a sport or in just anything. Like, honestly, criticism applies to so much more than just beyond art. Obviously, what I'm talking about is this video is more centric around art and storytelling and character creating, etc. But it applies to everything. Criticism and outside opinion is a very, very valuable resource that I think people take for granted a lot, and they don't realize how important it is. And a lot of people can have their experience with criticism and that kind of thing. It usually gets tainted, and then they'll act as if it's some terrible thing. And I think we need to, especially in this society nowadays and more present time, I think we really need to get across this idea that criticism is valuable, that none of us are perfect and we can all improve. And oftentimes, as self-aware as we can be, as good at self-correcting as we can be, we still need that outside opinion. We still need that fresh pair of eyes to be an outsider's look to tell us what's wrong or what we can get better at and things like this. And that applies to a lot of fields, not just art, but of course, art is specifically what I'm aiming at a little bit here. But, you know, my point stands. Criticism is important. And I'll say this to anybody out there who is, like, scared of criticism. For one thing, I can't stand it when people say, like, I don't need criticism. I will get better on my own. I don't need anyone else's opinion on it. I'm self-aware enough to be able to improve. Well, obviously, you're not self-aware enough to realize that you're biased to yourself. We are all biased towards ourselves, whether it be positively or negatively. You know, some of us look at what we create and all we see is garbage, and some of us look at what we create and all we see is something magnificent, and you can't always help that, and that's why having an outside opinion is very valuable. But I do know there are some people, especially people who haven't been exposed to criticism as much, at least in their current stage of life. It can be very daunting. It can be intimidating to have someone really tear you apart and tell you what's wrong with something. It can be really daunting to think about having somebody come at you and tell you something you maybe don't want to hear, you know? And I should say that when I say criticism, I'm not just talking about well thought out critiques. I'm also talking about the insults. I'm talking about the hate. I'm talking about the very, like, the very insensitive, unthoughtful comments people can give you, especially here on the internet and things like that. I'm talking about all of it. When I say criticism, I don't just mean well thought out critiques. I don't mean constructive criticism. I mean the whole spectrum of it, whether it be positive, somewhere in the middle, kind of harsher, or just plain negative, honestly kind of bullying, you know? So I think, I know it can be very daunting. I know because I have personal experience with that feeling, but it is a very good thing for you. And I believe if we can all learn to take it and learn how to handle it, you know, I think that we can all become better people through that. And obviously it's not something that happens overnight, you know? You don't have to feel bad if you're intimidated by getting criticism or asking for it or what have you. You're not wrong for feeling that way. It's like many other things, you know? You have to get used to it. But I will tell you this, you don't even have to take criticism necessarily. You don't. Free speech goes both ways. People can say whatever they want to you, and you have the right to say whatever you want back, and you also have the right to choose whether you or not you listen to them, you know? Just, you know. But the thing is, when it comes to things like critique and criticism, you have to, if you want to do what you're doing, especially when it comes to things like art, if you want to do this as a profession, if you want to make money doing this, or if you just want to get some notoriety and some fame out of it, which, contrary to what some people might tell you, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You need, if you want any of those things, you need to know how to take the criticism, the good and the bad. You need to know how to handle it, you know? And that's the thing. Now, of course, if you're just doing it because you do it and you don't really care what people think, you don't care if you get money, you don't care if you get famous, it's not going to be your job, then more power to you if you don't care about the criticism. But if you are somebody who wants to do what you're doing, especially in this case, art and characters and things, but it can apply to other fields, if you want to do what you're doing in any way where you want people to notice you or to be praised for what you do, you're going to have to learn to take that second opinion, you know? It's just something you got to know. And sure, you can choose if you don't, but I guarantee you, you're not going to get a job because people are going to hear, well, this person doesn't really like listening to other people's opinions that well. Your bosses are going to think, well, why do we want to hire them? They clearly don't want to work with other people. They're not going to listen to us, and we can't have that here. We need someone who will listen to us. If you're trying to get money, then you're not going to figure out what people actually want and where the money is if you're not willing to listen to people. Because trust me, listening to critique can tell you very well what audience you might be attracting or what people might want to see or what might appeal to people, etc. And if you want to get famous, you're not going to get famous if you can't get criticism, or at least you're going to get famous for all of the wrong reasons. Trust me. Just if you want to get attention for your art, you have to be able to listen and understand what people might want, and you also just need to handle it, because the unfortunate reality of internet popularity and internet notoriety is that the more wonderful things you get out of it, the more likely you're going to get a lot of negative things out of it. That is just the painful reality of things. And if you can't handle that, or if you aren't willing to learn how to handle that, it's going to be rather painful for you. But I'm not just going to leave you there, because I want to give some advice on how you can learn to handle criticism for anybody out there who's struggling to, or hasn't quite received it yet but really wants to, and things like that. I'm just going to give you some tips on how to handle it and how not to become infamous for how you handle it like some people do. So here's my first tip, and by far the best tip you can ever get when it comes to learning how to handle criticism. You gotta expose yourself to it. Criticism is like any other skill, which I will say, although this isn't about that, I will say there are a lot of people who seem to act as if we're all born knowing how to handle criticism. We aren't. We don't come out of the womb knowing how to be able to take insults. We don't come out of the womb knowing how to be told that we're doing something wrong. You're not born that way. It's something you have to get used to. And I can tell you that from personal experience. Obviously, if you look at my amount of subscribers, at some point I've gotten negative comments. YouTube, unlike many places on the internet, it can be a little harsher than a lot of places. Just like in comparison, just from what I know best, in comparison between like DeviantArt and YouTube. DeviantArt tends to be a little bit more positive, at least until you get to a certain level where your artwork ends up on the front page, and then you just open yourself up to a bunch of people you don't care about because you didn't really want to get on the front page anyway, but that's another story. But YouTube, however, people exercise their right to free speech a little bit more frequently, in both good and bad ways. But anyway, I know from experience when I was just a young budding YouTuber starting to get my subscribers, the first time I got a more negative comment, I can't tell you how much of a funk that put me in. Like, it really did put me in a funk. And I'll be totally honest about that. And honestly, when I got criticism a lot at that point, even if something wasn't really criticizing me, it just sounded kind of like just a little negative in terms of things, it would put me in a funk, you know? And that happens to a lot of people, especially people first starting out. Sometimes even if people just like irritate you, it really gets under your skin a lot, you know? I can think of plenty of YouTubers I see that start rising in popularity and they start getting those comments and it frustrates them, and you can tell in one of their videos that it frustrates them, and that's perfectly okay. But the thing is, over time, as I've gotten those comments, I've learned to not take them as seriously. I've learned how to handle it, because the key is here. I don't mean just taking criticism. Taking criticism and handling criticism are very different. You don't have to take all the criticism you get, because again, criticism can be in the form of insults. It can be in the form of things you didn't need to hear that aren't helpful to you. The key about criticism isn't just knowing how to take it, but it's just knowing how to handle it, all of it that comes with it. The good, the bad, the negative. You gotta learn not to let like too much good things go to your head, and you gotta learn how to not let negativity bother you. And of course, every now and again, I get those comments that really kind of get under my skin a little bit, but over time, because I've started to get more, I've become desensitized to it. I like to think of it as almost something like this, if any of you can relate. When we are growing up, you know, when we're little kids, words like stupid and idiot, those are like, those are terrifying words, you know? They're strong words to you as a kid. Nowadays, we say stupid and idiot all the time. We say all sorts of things all the time. And when you get to middle school, you know, the first time you hear the words like shit, you're like, oh my God, it comes off so strong. But with like the same with curse words and vulgar language, the more you hear it, the more it loses its oomph, you know, the more it doesn't become as offensive, or it doesn't become as strong to you, and it just becomes something you might even have in your casual lingo, you know? And that's the similar thing with criticism. Sometimes the first time you get it is oftentimes can be the worst, because it'll be the part where you're most not immune to it, and it can hurt, especially if it's an insult or something, you know? But as you get it more, your mind, if you're doing it right and you're not letting, and you're thinking and you're being logical, you'll learn not to take it so seriously and not take it to heart so much, and it will start to not offend you so much, and it will start not to become so scary, you know, and you'll basically get used to it. That's simply put, that's what it is, you know. Now, of course, how do you handle criticism? Well, let me give you more specific tips about that. We've learned how to desensitize yourself to it, but how do you actually start to handle it? Well, the first step, number one, and this applies to the internet, of course. It doesn't entirely apply to real life, because honestly, people are a lot more liberal with what they say on the internet than they are in real life. But understand that the internet is the internet. And if anyone knows, I don't really like the argument of, well, the internet's just the internet, so you just gotta deal with hate being there. I don't like that, because guess what? It doesn't really make it right to insult somebody for no reason, you know? I don't like that, and I think it's a hilarious response when people are saying that, like, when people say something mean to you and you counter their remark with something else and they say, oh, it's just the internet, dude, get used to it. Like, yeah, it's the internet. You should get used to people arguing back with your bullshit, but that's besides the point. I digress. However, as much as I don't like that as an argument, you do have to understand that on the internet, people are a lot more willing to say what they want because they have a lot more anonymity. You know, they're anonymous. And when you're in real life, it's harder to say those kind of things face to face, especially if you interact with someone every day. But on the internet, it's a lot easier to just say you're stupid and move on and act as if nothing happened, you know? So you do have to understand when you're online, especially if you're on a platform like YouTube, that the internet is the internet. People are going to say a lot of things that they never say to you in real life. And you're also going to interact with a lot of people who don't think like you do, or a lot of people who don't know you personally. You're going to deal with a lot of different people than you would in real life. That's just the reality of the internet, you know? And that is the first step to understanding how to take criticism, the good and the bad, is just knowing that just to expect it to show up, just to see it coming, you know? So that's step one. Step two is understand that you can ignore it. A lot of times people are very adamant about the fact that when you get criticism, you got to learn how to take it. This is true. If you get valid criticism with valid critique and valid advice, you should learn to evaluate it and see if you can apply it to your own work. That's a very important skill that everyone should learn. But you got to understand that you don't have to reply to everything. If you get a critique or a piece of criticism that you don't personally agree with, or that you think comes off a little rude, or that you think seems kind of irrational or unreasonable, or if you just get a flat-out insult, understand that you don't have to reply to them. You can just walk away from it, and you don't have to acknowledge it. Now, I will say that there is a difference. I think that if somebody gives you unwarranted criticism out of nowhere, for them to expect you to respond to it is a little ridiculous on their end, because you didn't ask, so you're not obligated to respond or even consider it. I will say, though, if you actually go out and ask for criticism and yet you only seem to acknowledge the good criticism and yet you seem to ignore anything at all that could possibly be anything negative about what you say, that's pushing it. You know, just choose what to ignore. But I will say this. I will say this. If you have two options, in whatever reason, either to respond like an ass or to ignore it, choose to ignore it. It'll be so much better for your reputation, trust me. Just know that you are fully within your right to ignore what people say. Like, okay? You don't have to respond, because sometimes responding can get you in so much more trouble than is worth it, you know? So that's step two. Just understand that if you get criticism you don't agree with, or you don't want to respond to or acknowledge, it's okay to ignore it. It's not wrong. Speaking of, this kind of goes along with it, learn to distinguish harsh criticism from actual insults. This is a big issue I see, especially with the YouTube art community, I guess, is where people seem to have this disconnection between what is a blatant insult that means to tear you down and what is just harsh criticism that maybe the person was a bit too mean, maybe not, that's subjective, you know, that kind of thing. If you learn to distinguish actual advice disguised behind pot shots and things that might get you a little riled up, and you distinguish them from actual genuine insults where the person's not trying to help you, they're just being rude. If you learn how to distinguish that, it'll be so helpful for you. The difference is, I'll tell you right here, the key difference is that harsh criticism, harsh critique, it still has genuine advice. You can still get something useful from it. Although it might insult you or it might make fun of what you created a little bit, it's still meant to, the person still wrote it with the intention to help you, with the intention to help you get better and succeed in what you're doing. They're just somebody who adds a bit of humor and a bit of shock value into what they say, and they just, you know, for whatever reason. Insults and bullying, like actual insults and bullying, which most people compare harsh humor to, is someone who's literally just sitting there and insulting and tearing down whatever you made, maybe even getting personal about it, and there's nothing there to actual value to you. And to give like a comparative example, harsh criticism would be something just like, wow, those limbs look like they went through a presser and they've been flattened and they just are nothing but noodles and it looks totally wrong compared to that torso. I would recommend looking at some anatomy and making sure you can make it straighter, or make sure you make them in proportion. Or another example would be, man, that head makes it look like they're barely standing upright. I think you should maybe make the head a little bit smaller so it's more proportioned with the body. Things like that. An insult would just be like, lol, your art is stupid, or that head looks like it's about to explode, or your art sucks, stop drawing. You know? That's genuinely insulting. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't really, you shouldn't have to give the time of day to, you know? That's what it is. On the contrary, harsh criticism is something that can actually be useful to you. And honestly, learning how to handle harsh criticism can make life so much more enjoyable, and it can make you learn how to laugh at your own flaws sometimes. Just a very important thing to do is just knowing how to distinguish genuine insults and well-meaning advice disguised with arguably good or bad pot shots and things. So, you know, there's that. My next snippet of advice is actually very important, just very important. Do not respond to people when you are heated and when you are riled up. Just don't do it. It is a death sentence. You will almost never win an argument like that, and you will come off as someone who's offended. You'll come off like you're not thinking straight, and sometimes you might not be thinking straight, you know? If you get something that really grinds your gears or gets under your skin, that's okay, but don't respond to it right away. Don't respond to it while you're emotional, as tempted as you are, because believe me, you will save yourself so much headache if you don't. I know, because I have this problem all the time. Sometimes, again, occasionally I'll get that thing that really bothers me a little bit. But what I try to do is I try to step back and I wait before I do it. And that's my best suggestion, is just to wait. Even let days go by before you even consider responding to it. Go back and reread it a few times before you respond to it. Because, believe me, if you respond while you're heated, your emotions are going to get in the way of your logic. Anything they said that could be reasonable will be blinded to you because you're so angry. Even if it's something that really you shouldn't take seriously, and honestly they're just one person saying that and nobody else believes it, you know, it'll get to you more. And taking a step back and letting yourself think it out can be very beneficial to you. It can let you realize that, hey, maybe this is not worthy of response. It's just too stupid to respond to. It can show you that it's not worth it. It can make you see that, oh, this person's just being a troll. They want me to respond, so let's just not respond and end the day. Or it can even make you realize, that person actually did have a point. You know, they were being honest. And it's just something that responding heated just causes so many problems. I can think of so many scenarios where emotional responses have caused someone's reputation to go down because they responded when they were in an emotional state. And some suggestions, if you need any ideas of how to blow off steam, I think one of the best ways I've found is not making a public post about it, but actually showing it to your friends and talking about it with your friends, whether it be online or in real life. And there's two benefits to this. One, it can help you calm down because it can help you laugh at something with your friends, or it can kind of let your emotions spread and dilate a little bit between people, you know? Because like it does feel good. I just know from experience. Sometimes when you show people that, it can help you learn to laugh at that kind of stuff. Because I know nowadays, just because of how I am with criticism, when I get certain insults, they kill me. They make me laugh, you know? And I do that with my friends, and we'll just kind of have our laugh in private and be done with it, you know? And it's no big deal. On the contrary, if you're surrounding yourself with the right people, showing it to your friends could actually tell you if you're being a little irrational. A lot of the times, me and my friends will open up with like, hey, I want to see if I'm crazy here, you know? Because if you're surrounding yourself with the right people, if you're being over emotional or you're kind of getting you're jumping the gun a little bit, if your friends are your friends and they're looking at it, they can tell you if you're maybe being a bit too emotional about it, or if maybe it's not as serious as you think it is. I can't tell you how many times I've had friends that are like, I've had friends in the past that'll come and say, this person's like copying my character and stealing it, and she showed it to us, and we were saying, okay, the only thing similar is the colors, and you can't even steal a color palette. That's ridiculous, you know? It's a basic color palette. Anyway, you know, it's not anything overly complicated. All the colors aren't even in the same place, you know? And we'll do that to each other all the time. If one of us is being kind of ridiculous, we'll tell each other that we're being ridiculous, or that the other person's being ridiculous. And that, you know, and we'll maybe even give a new insight as to why. I know there's plenty of times when my friends will vent about something and someone else will come in and say, okay, but consider, you know? If you're surrounding yourself with the right group of people, they'll have your back, and they'll make sure that you don't do something stupid because you're emotional about something, and they'll help you out. They'll just tell you, hey, maybe you're overreacting, and then they'll just give you a pat on the back and say, don't worry about it, you know? That's just kind of the idea. Venting is a very good thing, and people should use it, and also people should probably learn to try and vent more in private as opposed to publicly, but that's a story for another day. My final piece of advice would just be this, something that I think everyone needs to hear a little bit more. Understand that most of the time, chances are, there's far more positivity sent your way than hate. Now, that's not the case with everyone. Some people get ridiculously hated on by a lot of people for stupid reasons. And in those cases, those are different. But most of the time, especially when it comes to just like smaller YouTubers starting out, when they get their first hate comment, you know, it can seem like the end of the world. Like, gosh, I'm terrible, I'm horrible, I'm imperfect, whatever. Just understand that usually people disliking you is honestly oftentimes the minority, you know? Or at least when it comes to YouTube. Like, people get so riled up when they get like 10 dislikes without realizing they have 300 likes. Like, really, look at those numbers side by side. Does the 300 not stand out more, you know? And this is just a thing that people generally, just us as humans, have an issue with. We get so caught up on negativity. We just, as a species, the negative things stick out far more distinctly in our minds than the positive things. And that's just human nature, and there's not really anything wrong with that. After all, the negative experiences help it so we don't repeat that normally, at least when it comes to just generally. There's exceptions to that, but another story. But my point is, when you're doing, one of the key turnarounds for me for learning not to let criticism and insults put me in such a funk was that understanding that that was one message compared to about 20 positive ones. Even more than that, you know? At the time, it was a bit of a smaller number, you know? And that's something that can really help you. Just understanding that you're most likely, in most cases, going to get more positive feedback than you are negative. And if you're getting more negative than positive, well, that either means that something bad is happening and that there's some injustice in some way, which should be dealt with accordingly, or it means maybe you are doing something wrong, and maybe that there is something very critical that you should look at yourself for. But again, most of the time, you're going to receive positive feedback when it comes to your art and when it comes to your characters and your stories. And you shouldn't let those people be forced into silence because you got one hate comment, you know? So don't let negativity, don't let critique, don't let insults, don't let any of that bring down your world. Rarely is criticism of your work aimed at you. It is aimed at your work. And while our work as artists can feel like our babies, as artists and writers and what have you, it can feel like our children being insulted, but it's not. At the end of the day, it's someone telling you something about something you put on the internet. The people don't really know you. They don't know you personally. It's not a personal attack, and usually if it is, well, it's not worth your time anyway. And I think that would be my most key advice over everything, is just don't let the insults and the negativity ruin your day. Don't let it ruin your life, because it isn't the end of the world. And one person is nothing compared to the 10 or more people that could be complimenting you or lifting you up, you know? So just don't let one cloud ruin your sunny day, you know? So that's what I have to say about it. And of course, you know what that means. It's time for Patreon shoutouts. Woohoo! So, first things first, to my $2 tier plus patrons, I love you too. Thank you for the support. But you know whose power levels are over $9? Hayden's Art, The Gun Moon, Shadowcat Inc., Twisted Disaster, Jago, FEMA, and Skyak 2. Thank you all so much for their support, and I'm so glad you're my patrons. I love you so much. Smeeches, smeeches, smeeches. And with that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you in the next video, whatever it may be. Zodiac, out.